Right now we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at the concept of key performance indicators. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to fire up my box. I'm remoted into my server, and let's first go up and explore into my BI site, and let's go home on the BI site, the Mathino Group BI, just so we can come in and take a look. And remember the data connections I created earlier. We have a connection into OLAP, and looking in performance point content, we have no items up in here. By the way, notice this is a list, and if I came over to the items collection and I pulled down the new item type, if I did that, pulled that on down, here's the objects that I can create. And if I clicked one of these, this would automatically fire up Dashboard Designer, allow me to go in and create those. I point that out because you really want to start from the list where you're going to save the content into. That way it'll automatically post it back into the list that you fired it up from, so in case you have multiple lists, which you will. So now we see we have nothing up in here, and let's come in and drop that on out and go back to the Dashboard Designer Instance Workspace Demo 1 that we created earlier. Double click that, wait a year for it to open. Okay, and Dashboard Designer is open, and I'm pointing into my list, Performance Point Content, which is fine. That's where I want to save the information. Now I can go to create a KPI. I can either go to the Create tab and select KPI, or within the list I can right click, New, and KPI. It really just does not matter. As always in the land of Microsoft, or as by far the dominant way, there's multiple ways to do things. So we're going to come in at this time and I'll just say KPI, and my wizard pops on up. The first thing I'm going to create is a blank KPI, and I'll say OK. And now I have new KPI fired on up. Right over here it is KPI, and I could name it, which I'm going to do at this time. I'm going to name it blank 1, just to distinguish it in here. Now I'm going to come over to the Properties page. As soon as I switched pages in here, notice it picked up the name, and I'm going to add it into a display folder. I'm going to click Browse, and I'm going to create a new display folder, and I'm going to call this KPIs. And I'll say OK, because as we come through and start creating objects, I'm going to want to have them arranged into folders. If I come off of that and go up and click into Performance Point Content, see now the folder shows up, and there's blank 1 KPI. Again, there's the little pencil icon. The little pencil icon tells me that I am connected into SharePoint, but I have not saved all my changes. But if we go in and look at SharePoint and refresh the display, there's my new KPI. Notice this is the same as when I created the connection. It's named New KPI because the changes were not fully posted back, but that is the name change. But again, Dashboard Designer is a bi-directional agent, so it needs to go back and forth into SharePoint. So person responsible, again, I'm going to pick Bob. And you know, you can put down the designer or anything else you want to do. But let's go in and come back over to the editor and do the interesting thing. The first thing I see up in here is I've got actual and target. And as you were going through the course, remember what was covered in there is we have a metric, and that's in relation to, the metric is actual. That is what we're going to compare to the target. So if I come back over here to actual and target, notice when I go to target, what happens down here is my different colored indicators. You know, so I have best is 120. These are all configurable, which I'll do in just a second. But let's go back over to actual. I can change the name of that. I don't have to call it actual. I can call it such as metric, whatever you want to call it. If in your problem domain, in your business, you don't call them actuals, you call them something else, then change it. Numbered format, default. So if I click this on in here, the default is going to come back in, and this is just the number, the default. So it's going to, this is a blank KPI, and it's going to just display these as the default underlying source. Default, now data mappings, before I go into data mappings, let me show you calculation. Calculation, if I click in the default, no value down here is the default, and then I've got no value, do not do any calculation, not use data input from another source for this KPI. I just misspoke. Default up in here is the normalized weighting averages. It's not no value. Data value, etc. As you drop on down here, you see this also average of children, sum of children, etc. We use those when we create objective KPIs, which we will later on. So that if I am moving up and down in a KPI hierarchy, say that I have a head count and my overall head count of a intermittent level department is, I don't care, 500, and under that are 4 different departments, and those would roll on up. That would be sum of children, etc. Then that may roll into another head count, etc. So you've got it. See, max of children, min of children, etc. So we come through there and we set up our calculations. That's fairly important. And I'll say OK. And now we'll come into data mappings. Where indeed do we get metric off of? And right now metric is a hand coded, so it's in there at 1, and that's fine. Later on we'll come in when I create other types of metrics, and I'm going to bring in the data from a source, which is much more useful. So I got data value is 1. I'm going to say OK. And now fixed value. So if I come down here, so I've got my metric, and I'm in comparison to the target, and we're going to say the target is in here. Let me cancel this out. I'm going to say my metric is 5, and I'll say OK. And now my fixed value down here is 3, and I'll say that it's OK. Now I've got that coded on out. Now I can come down here and I can set the scoring pattern and indicator. So if I click that little button, it'll fire on up. And as in your courseware, you see these scoring patterns. Increasing is better, decreasing is better, like expenses, or closer to target is better, head count, right? But normally KPIs, we like to see, we're optimists, and we like to see things increase. At least I hope you're an optimist. So increasing is better, and here's these normalized patterns. These are more difficult to understand than than they look at first blush. You can go in and hit the Microsoft website and go in and read what a normalized value is and how they actually came through and did it. Or there is another course that's a 3-day course that just focuses on performance point services. That's course 50465 by the current author, and we go into much more detail on that. But anyway, let's go through and say next. And now you choose your indicators, whatever you want to do in here, all your weird indicators that you want. Colors are pretty much universal. Red's bad news, yellow's caution, and green's good news. Green is always good news, except, of course, in teeth color. So, or you can pick these smiley faces, whatever you want to do in here. And that's, I let the people that are actually going to suffer through working with the KPI make a decision here. So we're going to just go stoplight. That's fine. Next, enter your worst value. This is more involved than you think. Worst value, by default, we're going to put in there 0. Normally, the worst value is not 0. It's something different. Let's think about this. If we were coming through and we were creating an increase in value, then, and last year, let's do sales count. And last year, we sold 10,000 widgets. If we sell below 7,000 widgets, we go broke. So 0 is not worse. We are out of business by the time we hit 0. Our worst possible value in here, I would say, then would come in and we'd say 7,000. Now, why that matters, and I'm going to put in 2. No, I'm not. I'm going to come back later and do that. We'll leave it as 0, so we enter your worst value, and then we would go finish. But before I do that, let me come back over. You see this banded method in here? 3 is over here is the worst value. See, so right now set at 0, it's there. But if you had this at 10,000, or we did 10,000 last year. This year we want to do 12,000. So 1 is target 12,000. All right. 2 is actuals where we're at right now. Now the number 3, if we're going to go broke at below 7,000, so we set that at 7,000. You see how that tightens this band in? Once that band is tightened, then the colors, that changing from the red to the yellow to the green is affected. All right, so that's why you want to pay attention to that worst possible value. So we'll go next, and we've already picked everything, and we'll say finish, and now we've got our scoring patterns. By the way, you can change these by just grabbing them and dragging them around, right, etc. But please don't do that. It's just agony. Just type in what you want to do, rather than dragging it around and trying to get it right. Didn't I get that? There we go. I put the percentage in, didn't like that. So 100, so you can set them up like that. Now I've got the blank one, and I'm going to come over to the properties page, so and I'd enter some kind of a description, etc. And now if we switch on over, well, let's save it. No, let me show you. So now we're in here in performance point content, and now I've got new KPI. Drop that on down. Blank KPI, and we will come in and we'll save it. Maybe we will. Here she comes. There we go, and we'll save, and that posts on up, and there we have, over in performance point content, I've got, and I refresh the page, and there's blank 1 KPI. Okay. Now, you want to see that KPI. The only way we can see this KPI is we're going to have to come through, and KPIs are part of Scorecard. So I'm going to go into Performance Point Content, right-click, New, Scorecard, and I'm just going to take a standard analysis services scorecard, but I'm really going to just take the default, and I'll pick this on up. Don't worry about the scorecard. I'm going to give more detail as we go along. I'm just trying to right now demonstrate the KPI, the blank KPI. So import, we'll go create. Next down here like this, and if I click add up in here, what's loading, I'm going to wait for it, are the KPIs that exist underneath the cube because I created that. I went back through and I said create into analysis services, and I tied into this 2012 OLAP. Now I'm going to come back over and I'm going to say import SQL Server KPIs, and I'll say next, and she's going to error on me here because I don't have any down there, so I'm just going to go select, and now I'm going to select blank KPI, and I'll say OK, blank 1, next, and I'm not going to put any filters on the KPI, so I'll just come through. We'll cover the filters a little later on, and I'll come in and say finish. And there she is, new scorecard. Let it, the green spiral of death, update it. There's my KPI. Now I'm going to go over to properties of the scorecard, and I'm going to just call this scorecard blank 1, because the only purpose of this scorecard was to display KPI blank 1. I'm going to click browse and see if I expand out my display folders. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call this scorecard. Scorecards, where I'll create my scorecards, and I'll say OK. And now I'm in the display. And again, if I wanted to put this into some kind of a subfolder system, again, I would just click browse and I would create. And now I'll call these blank. So I've got my scorecard blanks, and I say OK. And now if I go in here, here's my scorecard, and if I select it down, oops, if I can ever select it, and I save my scorecard, I now have my scorecard. So again, if I come over to my editor, there is the KPI. So if I went in and did a change, let's do that. Let's go back to blank KPI, go into the editor, go into fixed value. I'm going to change the fixed value down here to 1. And say OK. Go back over to blank. Everything's still peachy. But if I come in here to the Home tab and pause a second. Oops. I mean, if I go to the Edit tab, now that I'm down here on a Performance Point Content, you see this Edit tab in here. Now I'm going to go Update. All right. And now metric is 5, target was 1. I'm up to 400%. We're doing smoking good. But let's say we come back down there and set that. And let's do my target again. And oops. And I'm going to change my target now to 25. All right. See, I used to run a sales organization. So let's change it over to 25. We'll come back over to the scorecard. Again, I'm going to call update. And now it's bad news. You were counting on that big commission check.